I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to do a review of the new Rokinon 50mm f1.2, and that is an AS-UMC. The AS stands for a spherical element that's a part of the optical formula, and the UMC stands for Samyang Rokinon's ultra multi-coating, and that refers to the coatings that are on this lens. And so this, along with the 21mm f1.4, are the newest mirrorless options that come from Samyang Rokinon and are really exciting for a number of reasons. Of course, I was really impressed when I read that this would not be a 50mm f1.4, but a 50mm f1.2, which of course puts it into fairly rare category there, that there are only a few lenses that have apertures as large as this, and it's been somewhat ironic to me to compare the size of this 50mm f1.2 lens with, I happen to have on hand right now a copy of the Canon 50mm f1.0 L series lens, and of course that lens is downright massive in every facet compared to this. But when it comes to the actual performance of this lens, this is a shockingly good performer at those wide apertures. And so today we're going to jump in and just take a look at a number of things about that. So number one, of course, this is made for mirrorless bodies. And so it comes in a Canon EF-M mount, which I am reviewing here on a Canon M3 body. And it also comes in a Sony E mount, a Fuji X mount, and then Micro Four Thirds mounts. Unfortunately, there are a few less supported, including the Samyang Next mount that was supported in the 12mm f2, and I know there are a few of you that are disappointed about that, and I can understand because this is a very compelling option here. But overall, this lens, depending on the actual crop sensor of the mount you're using on a Canon body like I'm using, this is an 80mm equivalent lens on full frame. And on the Sony or Fuji mounts, it's a 75mm equivalent lens. And then for those of you that shoot Micro Four Thirds, it'll have an effective field of view of like a 100mm lens on a full frame. As you can see, it is a nicely compact lens that really balances and fits nicely on modern mirrorless bodies. And so it's 385 grams, or about 13.5 ounces, and so it's still nice and light, although the lens itself has a dense feel to it. It's also about 2.9 inches long, or around 74 millimeters, and so it is reasonably short and compact. And of course it does come with a lens hood as well, and that lens hood reverses and stores nice and compactly on the lens itself. And so it has at the front here, it has a 62mm front filter thread. Unfortunately, that is not a particularly common one. I have reviewed 8 mirrorless lenses now, and of those 8 lenses, there are 7 different filter sizes. And so I really wish that there would be a consolidating to at least a few standards like there are in SLR lenses. But other than that, there's very little to complain about in the overall build quality. I did note that a difference in the 50mm lens compared to the 21mm, and it's probably copy specific, but I just can feel a little bit, if there's, for example, when I'm putting pressure on the focus ring, sometimes I can feel just a little bit of like a rocking feel on the mount. And so it doesn't mount quite as securely as either the 21mm that I've reviewed or the 12mm that I own. But as I said, that's probably a copy specific thing. I also did find that there's a little bit more weight to the action on the focus ring than what there is on the 21mm or the 12mm, and I prefer a little less damping than what this one has. It still glides along nice and easy, but it requires a little bit more weight, and of course I've been shooting in January and February here in Canada, and so out in the cold that becomes a little bit more pronounced, and it may loosen up some over time, but just out of the box I prefer the action of the 21mm over the 50mm. Now, there are a couple of quirks that I want to detail for this, and first I want to set your mind at ease about something. I've noted already from a few different user reviews, unfortunately some of the very first people to do user reviews on some of the sites like B&H or Amazon, that they say this lens doesn't work. And what they're alluding to is that their camera won't take pictures with the lens mounted. That's a pretty big problem. The problem is, of course, is that there is no electronic coupling on this lens. And so as far as the camera goes, although the lens can be physically mounted to the camera body, the camera doesn't necessarily know that there's a lens there because there's no electronic communication. So one thing that you have to do, whether you're using vintage glass through an adapter or a native mount lens that has no electronic coupling, is you have to change a setting in your camera body that allows for the shutter to be released when there's no lens mounted. Now, that's not because you want to release the shutter with no lens mounted. It's because when you have lenses like this or vintage glass mounted, the camera doesn't know that the lens is there. Now, once the lens is mounted and you've enabled that setting, there's no problem. The camera still meters fine. You can still see through the lens. I mean, light is still entering the sensor in the same way. And so you can see all of that. You can use it in AV mode. You can use it in manual mode. You can use it in essentially whatever mode you want, other than it's no use using it in like a fully automatic mode because the camera can't change the aperture and it can't focus for you. But beyond that, of course, it functions fairly much as normal, but there are a few drawbacks that come with that. With no electronic coupling means that there is no actual lens data that's communicated to the camera. And so in your EXIF data, when you download your images, you'll find that it won't say anything about the focal length, and it knows nothing about that, what the actual lens itself is. And so I do miss having those things, and that's probably my greatest regret with lenses like this. Zeiss lenses, for example, are fully manual focus as well, but because there's electronic coupling, you get all of the normal data and information that's communicated there. And I'm kind of a detail person, and so I care about those things. That being said, I'm willing to make the sacrifice. I have been able to willing to make the sacrifice with the 12mm f2 because I like the glass so much, and that would be true of this lens as well. But just know that that will be a quirk. Also, because of that, your processing software that you're using won't be able to detect what the lens is. And so there won't be any kind of standard profile for correcting distortion or vignette. If you wanted to correct for those things, you have to do it manually in post-processing. Fortunately, although this has a massive f1.2 aperture, Vignette is actually not very heavy at all. And so I'm impressed with what they've been able to do with that. And there are a little bit of chromatic aberrations, but probably not enough to be really objectionable in any kind of field use, and fairly easy to correct for, and distortion is virtually non-existent. And so, at least in the case of these lenses, you won't necessarily miss a whole lot by not having a standard profile to correct for that. Now, the one optical flaw that I will point out with this lens, and if you haven't already, I would encourage you to take a look where I examine image quality much more carefully in this episode here. And basically the one thing that I detail in that episode is that this lens does have a flare pattern when the sun is put into the frame. It doesn't flare in the sense of losing contrast so much, what's called veiling, but it does show some ghosting artifacts. And so you'll be careful, have to be careful in the way that you position the sun in the frame if you choose to shoot like that. Now, of course, this it basically performs much like an 85mm lens on a full-frame body. And so that means that it certainly can throw backgrounds very out of focus. And this lens actually produces very nice bokeh. It has good sharpness, even wide open at f1.2, and it's very useful at f1.2, and stopping down a bit more provides even more sharpness and contrast. And so overall, it performs very nicely and is very usable at those wide apertures. In fact, probably more so than even what the Canon 50mm f1.2 L series lens is. I would say that wide open sharpness and resolution is more impressive from this lens as compared with that. And so it's doing a very effective job even at those wide apertures. Now this lens also has a manual aperture ring, which means you're going to have to select your aperture accordingly, and so you can watch the aperture close down as you move the aperture ring in, and so stop down to you know, anywhere from f2.8 on, it actually becomes a quite effective landscape lens, and I've been very impressed by the great resolution even at infinity when stopped down like that. When it comes to the actual focusing, fortunately, mirrorless bodies are more accommodating to manual focus lenses than what most DSLRs are. They include, for one thing, when you're using the lens, your actual LCD will show the true depth of field, and so that helps you to achieving visual aid. The same is true if you're using an EVF like I am here. And beyond that, of course, it allows you to easily magnify the image either on the screen or in the EVF. And many mirrorless bodies like the one I'm using also allow for aids like focus peaking that help you to show what part of the image is in focus. So as a result, between the variety of those things, I found that I have had quite consistent focus results, and that's not really an issue for me. This lens has a price point of $499 at B&H Photo. And so that means that it really is testing a higher price point than any of the mirrorless lenses from Rokinon before. That being said, this does have a premium feel, and if you haven't taken a look at my build quality video, here's a link to that right here. But it really has a very high quality feel to it, a high quality design, and optically it really is an exceptional lens. And so if you use kind of the comps out there amongst mirrorless lenses, in many cases, it's still undercutting the first-party competitors in that. And of course, when it comes to the Canon EFM system that I'm using, there are no competitors for it. Canon has really been slow in releasing prime lenses with only a single 22mm f2 prime. Now I recognize that this is a different focal length here, but of course it's offering up an aperture that is a full stop and a half faster than that of the Canon lens. And so the advent of this lens finally gives Canon users a decent portrait option. And this is a very nice little portrait lens. And so those of you that are shooting mirrorless and looking to shoot portraits, this is a great alternative out there. And so I wouldn't say that the lens is overpriced. I wouldn't say that it's underpriced either, but probably that's about an appropriate price point for it. And if you're mostly interested in doing video, for a little bit more, you can get a cine version of this lens that has a declicked aperture and that also is already geared, and so it's ready to be used with focus follow type systems or motor-driven focus systems. So really the bottom line when it comes to both of these new Rokinon Samyang lenses is that if you are not put off by the quirks of having a manual focus lens without electronic coupling, you'll find that there is really nothing else that you will be dissatisfied about with these lenses. So basically, if you can accept the premise of this lens, then you will love the reality of the lens because it is very, very sharp, has beautiful image quality, beautiful bokeh, it has good color rendition, and of course it has a great size that is compact enough that it's a very natural fit for these manual focus bodies and weighs little enough that you can carry this combination probably all day long and not really be bothered by the weight. And so that's certainly very much a plus. And so I'm happy to give this lens my recommendation. And if you would like to see more images from it, there's a link to an image gallery down below. There's also a link to purchase this lens if you're so inclined. And I'd appreciate if you would use my buying links when you purchase the lens, as your purchases help to fund both this channel and my website, and so I can continue to do these reviews. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you haven't already, please subscribe. Have a great day.